So today I'm going to show you how to buy an online business. The first step to buying an online business is understanding the basics. What does an online business mean? An online business, in my opinion, is anything that can be operated from home. It's somehow related to operating online. Think about e-commerce companies, Amazon companies, digital marketing agencies, SaaS and software, anything like that. And there's a million of these types of companies out there. There's so many companies that you can run from the comfort of your home or while you're traveling the world. For example, I spent 9 months in Southeast Asia last year with my wife and 2 kids, and I could do that because I didn't have to go to a laundromat and empty, coins or whatever it happens to be. So, just make sure that if you want to buy an online business, you understand the differences between that and operating a brick and mortar business, or between starting your own business. And we all know starting your own business has a huge failure rate, something like 65 to 90% failure rate, depending on what metrics you're looking at and what types of business you're looking at starting. But, the benefits of buying an online business are you can step into some business that somebody made and make money and profits from day one with a complete system in place already built for you, and you're trained by the person who built the business. They have expert level knowledge in that set of systems and business operations, and they're going to pass that on to you when you buy that business. So module 1, the first step in buying a business would be to understand the basics. The next step would be to understand valuations. How are companies valued in the marketplace for the type of company you want to buy? So most companies in the online space are valued based on a multiple of their SDE or EBITDA. And what that basically means is you take the net profits of a company, you add back any personal expenses or any expenses run through the business that didn't drive revenue, and you add that to the profit. So let's say a company did, it said $200,000 in profits, but there was another $100,000 in add backs from maybe personal automobile expenses and personal vacations the owner took that didn't drive revenue. Well, you just add that back to the $200,000, and now you have a business that really made $300,000. And these businesses are typically multiplied by what's called a multiplier or multiple. And maybe that type of business, that size of business, sells for 3 multiple. So you would take $300,000 times 3, and you have a $900,000 valuation of that type and size of company. Pretty straightforward. The most difficult part is understanding what multiple to apply to that business, what aspects of a business changes that multiple up or down, and then how to derive the SDE of a business. What's acceptable as an add back, what's not acceptable as an add back. The next step would be understanding what type of business to acquire. This requires a self-assessment, understanding your skills, your desires. What kind of business do you want to buy? Do you want to buy a product-based business? Do you want to buy a service-based business? Are you very, tech-enabled? Are you very tech savvy? You can buy SaaS or software business. So just sort of doing some introspection and understanding what type of business is the best business for you. And after you do that, it's important to understand how to be a successful buyer. Just because you have the funds, the money to buy a company doesn't mean that business owner wants to sell the company to you. It's not like, business owner selling his business isn't like selling a used car or an old couch or something like that. There's a lot of personal connections that this business owner has made while he was building his business. He may have employees that he really cares about. It may have taken him 5 or 10 or 15 or sometimes 20 or 30 years of his life to build that business. And maybe his wife and kids work in the business, or his cousins or nephews or something like that. And he doesn't want to sell this business to just anybody. He cares for that team. He cares about the name and the reputation of his business. He cares about his clients. He cares about the suppliers. Whatever it is, there's definitely an emotional attachment to businesses that you don't see when buying other types of assets. So, it definitely pays to create a personal connection with the business owner and, win them over, right? Just having the money isn't always enough. So just take that personal connection into consideration when you're thinking about buying a business. The next step would be financing your acquisition. How are you going to buy the business, right? It's just like when you go to buy a house. You meet with a lender, you get pre-qualified to understand how much home you can afford to buy. It's no different with buying a business. So you want to meet with a lender, probably an SBA lender. In the United States, we have a great program called the SBA program where you can buy a company with as little as 10 and even sometimes 5% down, depending on the deal and the structure. But you want to find a lender if you're going to buy an online business, one that has experience underwriting and closing on online businesses. These are typically termed asset-light businesses or asset-free businesses because they don't have buildings and equipment and trucks and machinery and all these other things that a lender can collateralize on a loan. There's really just cash flow in these types of businesses. So finding a lender that is comfortable lending on a cash flow basis is really important. And there's not a ton of them out there. Most lenders actually don't underwrite on online businesses. So it's important to find the right lender for your business. Meeting with these lenders will typically write you what's called a pre-qualification letter. It will basically say, John is pre-qualified to buy up to a $5 million property or $5 million business based upon the financials that we reviewed with him. And they'll take a look at your tax returns and your personal financial statement, things like that. It's pretty straightforward. Maybe takes an hour to get the paperwork and docs together, and they'll write you a nice letter, and that will give you your foot in the door with any business that's in your within your affordability. The next step would be to understand how to source deals. Where do you find a business to buy? So there's for sale by owner platforms, like Biz by Sell is the world's largest platform to find a business for sale. I believe you can find businesses for sale by owner on there. You can also find a lot of broker related businesses, broker represented businesses. So understand what kind of business you're looking at. If you want to work through a broker and buy a broker related business or broker represented business, then there's plenty of platforms out there. You can go to Website Closers and Quiet Light and Flippa, and there's a ton of these things out there. They all have their own menu of businesses that are available for sale. You can go to each one of those and review what businesses they currently have for sale. If you want to find off-market listings, then that's going to be a little bit more work, but it could pay off in the end, right? So you get to create a personal relationship with the seller as opposed to working directly with the broker representing the seller. Sometimes you can create better personal relationships and better connections, and you can arrange a better structure and price for your business. However, the flip side of that is that these businesses won't have documents prepared that you will want to see when you're looking to buy a business. They sometimes will be behind on their bookkeeping, if they have bookkeeping at all. They won't be in preferred formats like QuickBook exports. They won't have maybe up-to-date tax returns. They won't have offering memorandum that tell you all about the business. So you're going to have to take some time to gather these things, and it's just a little bit, quite a bit more work, but it could be worth it in the end. Just depends on how much time and money and effort you have to find a business. The next thing you would want to do is preliminary assessment. So preliminary assessment is basically it's a quick review of a business to make sure it matches your initial requirements, right? Is it the type of business that you want to acquire? Does it have reliable revenue and profitability over the past few years? Does it have huge swings of seasonality? Things like this. Does it have customer concentration risk or key man risk, right? Is half of the income coming from one client? If so, that's a risky business and probably one that you don't want to acquire. So learn to do a preliminary assessment within, I would say, 30 minutes to an hour. Just a quick look at a business to make sure it warrants more of your time to investigate it further. So after you do that preliminary assessment, it's time to craft an offer. You'll understand how to value the business because you're going to have to put a value, how much you're going to pay the business owner in that offer. You're going to have to create a structure. How much of that value are you going to pay in cash? Are you going to ask for any seller financing? Is there going to be any earnout? This gets kind of detailed in there, but crafting an offer would be your next step. And understanding what a market offer is, right? If you're buying a company that's represented by a broker or an advisor, don't forget that seller has to pay that broker a commission at close. So if you're looking to do a largely seller finance deal or an all seller finance deal, you probably won't be able to accomplish that with a company that's being represented by a broker. For example, if you were buying $1 million company and you wanted the seller to finance 90% of it and you're going to give them $100,000 down in cash at close, well, they're going to owe that broker that $100,000 for their commission. So the seller's going to be walking away with nothing in his pocket. And think about building a business over the course of 5 or 10 years. Do you want to do that and then go sell your business for absolutely zero cash at close? Probably not. I mean, those things exist, but They're going to be very hard to find. Most of the time, buyers are going to want to cash out. They're going to want to receive a considerable amount of cash at close that's secure, and they can put in the bank or go buy another business or go, buy their home or whatever they want to do with it. But if you're buying through a broker, just make sure you understand what kind of offers are acceptable and what kinds are not. And if you're looking for seller finance deals or majority seller finance deals, you're going to have to source those deals yourself directly for sale by owner stuff. So after you craft an offer, begins the due diligence. And due diligence is essentially where you get to make sure the business is what the seller is claiming it is. It's your opportunity to investigate every part of that business. So you're going to want to ask for tax returns and bank statements and credit card statements and SOP, guidelines and if there's products pricing and import taxes, and everything you can possibly think of. We have a very long due diligence checklist that you just go put it it's in an Excel spreadsheet or Google spreadsheet, and you can just go down the line and make requests and then check them off and make sure that business is not only the business you want to buy, but it's a good business and it is what they said it was going to be. And a lot of times in the due diligence process, you'll uncover things more often than not by accident that the seller didn't mention or left out. Once in a while, it's a large enough difference where you need to renegotiate a little bit. But it's always a good idea to make sure you have a problem-solving mindset while you're going through due diligence in case any of these things pop up, and always take the perspective that it was an innocent mistake and try to figure out a way to continue moving forward. If it's a deal you would like to do and it's the business you want to buy, solve the problem and get to the next step. So after you do due diligence and you have, probably this is a good time to have some attorneys jump in and some due diligence teams or quality of earnings teams jump in if you don't know how to do that stuff on your own, and have a third party, an experienced professional third party, take a look at this business so you aren't buying a business that it isn't what it was represented or isn't a good business. After this is over, you're going to go to the closing table, right? It's not a real table when you're dealing with online businesses like it would be in maybe buying a home, but it's the same essential process, right? You and your lender and your attorneys come together with the seller and his attorney, and there's a transfer of money and a transfer of the assets that you're buying, and everything's done mostly on a Google Meet or a Zoom call or something like that. Either the bank will wire the money to the seller, or the bank will wire the money to an escrow service, or you will wire money to an escrow service, which is a third party that will hold that money and then wait for the seller to transfer the business assets over to you. Everybody sort of checks off the box that it's been done, and then the escrow company will send that money over to the seller. Just eliminates the concern or worry that you're going to send over a big chunk of money and the seller just disappears. So use an escrow service if you can. Sometimes attorneys will act as escrow services, or sometimes you just have to use an independent escrow service, but that's definitely advisable. So you're at the closing table, you hand over the money, usually through an escrow service. They hand you the assets, the keys to the business, they transfer everything into your name, and you're now the proud new owner of an online business. So what do you do next? That's essentially the process to buy an online business. But then you have to operate and manage and ideally scale the business. So my advice to you, and we'll talk about this more in depth in a future video, but when they hand you the keys to that business, don't touch a thing. Do not change anything in that business, because you're buying a set of humans and a set of procedures and strategies and marketing tactics and systems and products or services that have worked for years, probably many years, successfully. Everything works not perfectly, but pretty well to be able to be a business that you're buying at this point, right? So the last thing you want to do is come in and start changing marketing, and then that business starts faltering, or the profitability of the business declines because you didn't know the history of the marketing strategy with that business, what things they've tried, what things they haven't tried, what worked out, what didn't, and how they got to that marketing strategy they're at today. So it's a perfectly, almost perfectly operating set of systems, and to go in and start pulling levers and tinkering with it on day one really doesn't make any sense. And I've seen several business owners do this very unsuccessfully. So, learn from the business owner for several months, and then let the business run on cruise control for several more months while you really understand the history and the existing business. And then when it's time to change stuff, and I'm speaking especially if you're more inexperienced, but when it comes time to change things and experiment, try changing one thing at a time, and that way you know exactly what caused that change. If you start pulling too many levers and changing too many things at a time, then you don't really understand what caused that change. It could be, change A or change B or change C. There's too many, cooks in the kitchen at that point. So change one thing and just, take some time and get as much of your investment back as you possibly can before you start trying to change the business, because it's a business you bought for a reason. It's making a lot of money. So that would be the next step, obviously after closing the business and owning the business. And then you're going to come one day where you want to sell the business, and it's an entirely different conversation. But essentially, you do all of this backwards. You take everything that you looked for in a business, and you make that business now have all of those positive attributes to a new potential buyer, and really set yourself up for success, because having these things in place can change the value of a business dramatically, as you will learn as you go through the process. So that's essentially how to buy an online business. I appreciate you guys sticking through this and learning the fundamentals here. Happy to go through. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments below. I'll make some future videos going through each one of these steps in greater detail, and then additionally on the operating, scaling, and prepping for exit. But I appreciate your time. I'll talk to you soon.